In this video, we will use an external input device to demonstrate how students could make an interactive content book. We're going to be using the third grade standard about European explorers, but you can use this with any standard. To program our book, we will use a free web-based kid-friendly programming app called Scratch from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. You can follow along with this video without having to have a Scratch account, but your program will not be saved. Plus, you will want to have a Scratch teacher account before you have your students do this activity. With a Scratch teacher account, you can create student accounts for all of your students, and you can monitor their work. To begin creating a Scratch teacher account, just go to the Scratch teacher account FAQ. So I'm just going to query on Scratch teacher account FAQ. And the first thing that comes up, you'll see it's from MIT. I'll click on that. And this page will give you all of the information for what you can do with a Scratch teacher account and why you would want one. And it lets you fill out the request form. You just click on the request form here, and then it's going to walk you through the steps. You will probably need some form of ID to show that you're a teacher. I think I just used the header from an email that showed my teacher organization, but they'll tell you what you can use. All right, let's get started.
Today I'm going to show you some cool ways to integrate technology in your social studies classroom in ways that still align with the Georgia Standards of Excellence. So we're going to be working with an external input device. You may recognize these. You may have these at your school. If you don't, there are a number of groups that make these. It's an external input device because it has like the click and space bar, and you can use the up arrow, down arrow, and on the back you can attach it to letter keys. So it really acts like an external keyboard and mouse, but the cool thing is you can hook it up electronically to do stuff without using a keyboard. So today's activity is going to work with the third grade standard for the European explorers, but you can use this in any grade with any standard. Really all you're asking them to do is create an interactive book that people can learn about whatever topic it is you're teaching. So today it's going to be the European explorers. It could be World War I, it could be the Civil War, it could be anything. Now this external input device works by creating a circuit. So I'm going to plug this end into my computer, and then we have this bottom strip called the ground. So that's the first connection that I've hooked up. I've put a little metal piece of foil here and I've attached a wire with glue. Now you can use these little alligator clips that come with the external input device, but they tend to be a little bit bulky. So I literally just took a piece of ordinary wire and I just used wire strippers to strip the edge, and that way all I have is this little piece of metal wire in here. But I could just hook the alligator clip to this instead. It's just as you turn the pages it would get a little bulky. So now normally I would cut this wire, but I use these for projects that I'm really going to be like for bulletin boards where I'm going to have the computer in my classroom and I want to run the wires from the outside bulletin board into my classroom. So I'm going to leave this really long, but you can use a short wire, or like I said, you can just use the alligator clip. But what I did is I hooked this up to the foil, and then just to make my life a little easier hooking to the circuit board, I'm just going to take one of these alligator clips and clip it to the other end of the wire. But you could just wrap the wire around the ground of your external circuit board. But this just makes it a little easier. I just hook it to the alligator clip, and that way I can just hook the alligator clip to the ground. Like that. And so now the ground is set up. So I've done the same thing here. I've taken a wire and I've hooked it to a piece of aluminum foil. I cut a little slot in the page so that I can put foil on the back side. So this actually conducts through the page. It won't conduct through the paper, so you have to cut like a little V in the paper. And you put foil on both sides. And then I hook that up the same way I did the ground, only this time I'm going to put it to the space bar. So I'm going to take the end of this wire, which is also hooked to a alligator clip, and I'm just going to hook that to my space key. Okay, so I've hooked wires into the top of each page with foil on both sides of the page. I've hooked each wire to something on my external circuit board. This is still hooked to ground. The very first, the back of the cover is hooked to ground, and each page is hooked to a control. So this is hooked to the space bar, this is hooked to the left arrow, this is hooked to the up arrow, and I'll show you the programming for how that works.
Let's take a quick look at how to program our external input device. So I'm just going to search on Scratch, and I'll push enter, and it's pretty much always the first one that comes up. It should be Scratch. Whoops. It should be scratch.mit.edu. Go ahead and click on that. It's going to go ahead and click on Create. The only problem with doing it this way is that it will not save your work. It will allow you to work with the Makey Makey right now, but nothing will be saved. And the same thing for your students. They can create programs without having an account, but nothing will be saved. So I'm just closing the little video tutorial there. They have a bunch of tutorials on how to do everything. And I'm going to ignore the cat, the sprite, pretty much everything. All I really need to do is go to events. An event is when something happens that triggers the program. So I can make an event that's clicking the flag, but I want an event that is when a key is pressed, because that's what my external input device does. It says this key has been pressed. So I'm going to select when space key pressed. And then I'm going to click on the sound tab because I need to record what I want to say first. There are pre-recorded sounds that you can use, but obviously I want the students to be able to record their own voices and their own written out script. So we click on you just mouse over the little speaker here. You do not click on it. You just mouse over it and you'll see the microphone lets you record your own sound. So I'm going to click the microphone. Can I use your microphone? And you have to say allow. Sometimes the kids will skip this and say block, and then you'll have to go back and allow it. But if you catch it on the first try, click allow. And now it can use my microphone. And you can see it showing me that my microphone is working here. I'm going to click record. Jacques Cartier was a French explorer. I click the square to stop recording, and I get these little bars where I can trim stuff out, which is really good for your kiddos. And I really recommend this for your multilingual learners or your English language learners, because this allows them to practice speaking at their own rate. They can, if they mess up, they can just re-record it. They can clip out parts where they say things they didn't mean to say, or they mispronounce a word or whatever. This is really, really accessible for multilingual or English language learners. So once I'm happy with it and I've trimmed off the parts that I don't want, I can play it and listen to it, but I know it's what I want, so I'm going to hit save. And I recommend that my kids always change the name to whatever it is they recorded. So we're going to call this Jacques and hit enter. And the nice thing about Scratch is when you have an account, it will be saving this as you go. Obviously, I'm not signed in, so it won't. So I've recorded my sound. I've named it. I go back to my code tab, and all I have to do is click on the sound button, and I pull out the play sound until done. You can just say play sound, but then if they start turning the pages really quickly, all of the sounds will start to overlap, and that gets annoying. But that can be fun troubleshooting for them to figure out. So you maybe don't tell them this and let them figure it out themselves. And I can choose different sounds by clicking on this little down arrow. There's meow, which is the default sound that it opens to. I can play Jacques, or I can record a different one. This is now set up when the space key is pressed, as it will be when we turn the page, because our wire is hooked up to the space key. It's going to play the recording I just made.
Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. When the two metal bits touch, that will close the circuit and allow the program to run. So when we turn the page, those two metal bits are going to touch and it will run the program.
Jacques Cartier was a French explorer who sailed to the New World hoping to find a northwest passage to get around the Americas and get to Asia so they could continue trade across water. Instead, he sailed up the St. Lawrence River and discovered it did not go through. Henry Hudson was an English explorer. He was also looking for a northwest passage. He sailed into the area around New York and sailed up the Hudson River, and so it is named after him. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Columbus actually was an Italian explorer, but the king and queen of Spain were the ones who financed his trip, so he sailed under their flag. He thought that he was just going to cross the ocean and land in Asia, but instead he discovered there were an entire two continents in between.
So now picture students doing this. They do all the research, they learn the content, they write these passages, they record their voices explaining about each explorer or whatever content it is. This is a really rich activity that incorporates both the technology and the social studies standards.
So if you've stayed with me this far, it's possible you're actually going to have your students create one of these interactive books. And so now I have to have a little confession time. The program that I actually used to make the book is a little more complicated than the one that I showed you. The one that I showed you works great if you only are going to turn one page. But as you keep turning pages, the wires from the previous page are going to get triggered when you turn the next page. So you'll wind up with both recordings playing at the same time. And then if you turn a third page, you'll have all three recordings playing at the same time. So you have to set up a way for the program to know not to do that first action again. And we do this with variables. So here's the program. And making a variable is really easy. You just go to the variables and you say, make a variable, and you type in the name of your variable. Let's do Ponce de Leon. Say okay. And so now I have a variable over here called Ponce de Leon. And to create my program, I have to start it first by clicking the flag. So I'm going to go to Events, and I'm going to pull out When Clicked, the flag, and I'm going to set all of the variables to 0. So however many pages I have, however many recordings I'm going to play, I've got to set all of those variables to 0. So I go to Variables, I pull out this Set Whatever to 0, and I can just change the name of the variable here, and I can click on my variables. And so essentially every single recording that I'm going to play, I have a variable for that recording, and I set it to 0. That's super simple. Then where I put the, when whatever key on the external circuit board is pressed, if it's the up arrow, the down arrow, the side arrow, the space, whatever, we're going to play the sound, but we're going to put in an if loop. So we go to Controls, and we pull out one of these if-then loops, right? And all I did was pull the set the variable, I stick it in the control loop, and I say set the variable to 1, and I pull out my sound. I'm going to play the sound, play the sound, and I set whatever sound I want to play. It should be for that variable. So if this is going to be Ponce de Leon, I would set my sound that I named Ponce de Leon. And then I would say stop all sounds just to make sure that it's done. Now I have to say, when is this going to play? If the variable is set to 0, which it is at the very beginning of the program, so I've got to come to my operators, if whatever equals, so I'm going to pull out this, right? And I'm going to go to my variables, and I put my variable in if, not Ponce, I want Ponce de Leon. If Ponce de Leon is set to, and I'm just going to type in 0, which it is at the beginning, then it's going to run the program. The first thing it does is set the variable to 1. It plays the sound, it stops all sounds. Now Ponce de Leon is set to 1. At the end when I run it, you see over here it's set to 1. This means it's not going to play the sound again. So when I do the next thing, I go to play Hudson, it plays Hudson, but it tries to play Ponce de Leon because this is still touching the metal ground. It's going to try to play it, but it says, oh, I'm not going to play it because it's set to 1. It's not set to 0. I don't do any of this if it's set to something other than 0. I only do this if it's set to 0, and it's no longer set to 0. And you just do this exact same thing for all of your sounds. I know this is a little confusing and a little advanced, but pause the video, take a look at it, try to find the operators, and play with it. That's how you learn. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.